Hey guys, welcome back. It's Fletch, and it's actually a couple days later since I shot the first part of this video. And so you may notice I have a different colored shirt on and some other things. But today we're going to be talking about the history of kind of small arms ammunition and why like our military and some other organizations use the type of ammunition that they use. And before we get started, I did also want to make it perfectly clear that this video may not be a video that everyone wants to listen to. In this video, I'm going to be talking about concepts of like an ammunition that's designed to cause an injury versus an ammunition that's designed to cause a death, or an ammunition that's designed to injure versus kill. And so if you're just not comfortable with that concept or hearing about that, then now's the time to shut off the video. The first written agreement by quote-unquote civilized countries agreeing to use humane types of small arms or warfare was the Declaration of St Petersburg, and it was signed by the participating parties on the 11th of December of 1863. So let's read the important parts of that here real quick. Considering that the progress of civilization should have the effect of alleviating as much as possible the calamities of war, that only legitimate objective which states should endeavor to accomplish during war is to weaken the military forces of the enemy, that for this purpose it is sufficient to disable the greatest possible number of men, that this objective would be exceeded by the employment of arms which uselessly aggravate the sufferings of disabled men or render them death inevitable, that the employment of such arms would therefore be contrary to the laws of humanity. And so, in a nutshell, basically what that's saying is that they're agreeing not to use any type of weapons that is going to cause inevitable death or undue suffering because it's inhumane. Well, in this was the first written record of it, but in July 29th of 1899, the Hague International Peace Conference, or the Hague, as some people call it, they created the laws of war. And in that, they gave it the title, The Declaration on the Use of Bullets Which Expand or Flatten in the Human Body. And in that, they directly cited back to the Declaration of St. Petersburg from 1863. And the reason why I'm pointing this out to you is I'm laying the foundation for what I'm about to share with you. Now, also, there's people out there that think that the quote-unquote rules of war or whatever that have to do with using certain types of ammunition and not others was in the Geneva Convention. And in this case, that's simply not true. The Geneva Convention did not address the small arms ammunition or anything like that. The Geneva Convention is more along the lines of rules for treatment of prisoners of war and different things like that. So we can just kind of cross off the Geneva Convention because that doesn't apply to what we're talking about here today. Now, the reason why I'm laying out the history of this is so that you understand that the decision to use like a full metal jacket round or a expanding round wasn't necessarily based on what was the most efficient round to use. Where this idea or concept started was all the way back in 1863, where they agreed that rounds that were designed to expand or flatten in the human body caused inevitable death, undue suffering, and it was inhumane in civilized warfare. And hence the terms injure versus kill or injury versus death. Now, how does that apply towards an SHTF or WRL situation? Why are you telling us, Fletch? Well, that's a great question, and I'm about to explain that to you. All right. Now, in an SHTF or WRL situation, if someone is trying to kill you, for whatever reason, doesn't matter, according to God's law or natural law, we all have the inalienable right to defend ourselves anytime, anywhere. We don't need the government's permission to do it. We don't need anyone else's permission to do it. We have that sovereign, inalienable right to defend ourselves. So if someone is trying to kill you or cause seriously bodily harm to yourself or your loved ones, you have the right to defend yourself. Now, going along with natural law, there's a kind of a litmus test, so to speak, that's called the prudent and reasonable doctrine. And basically what that says is that you have the right to defend yourself, but to the degree that a reasonable and prudent person would do it, and that you would be judged by other reasonable and prudent people as to whether or not what you did was in fact reasonable and prudent. And I know I've said reasonable and prudent a lot, but because that's the phrase, and unfortunately that's just how it works. So in a self-defense situation, most generally, that is how it's assessed, whether or not what you did was right or whether what you did was wrong. All right? Now, having said all that, to say this. If someone is trying to kill you, you have the right to defend yourself. You have the right to meet their level of force with the same level of force or a higher level of force. But, you know, as an example, you know, if someone spits in your face, you can't jump to, you know, pulling out your concealed carry weapon and shooting them, right? And I know that's a logical extreme, but it makes the point, okay? So, and typically, you know, like in law enforcement, we were trained, you know, that you have a continuum of force, and, you know, you apply force to the same level that it's applied, and one step beyond that, and that one step is it, okay? So let's keep that in mind as well. So if someone is trying to kill you, that's deadly force. So then you, therefore, in order to protect yourself, are also authorized to use deadly force. Now, these are my opinions, and this is my commentary based on my opinions. This is not legal advice. It should not be construed in any way, shape, or form as legal advice. Having said that, if someone is trying to kill you and you have the option to use different types of weapons, different types of ammunition, do you want to use something that would be, you know, like a full metal jacket might be one of these over here that's intended more towards injure or injury? Whereas an expanding round, according to the Declaration of St Petersburg, would tend to be something that would cause imminent death or kill someone. That's not a decision that I could make for you or anyone else for that matter. Because when push comes to shove, if the defecation never hits the oscillation, and I say if that ever happens, we don't know if it's going to or not, but if it does, chances are your nosy, pushy brother-in-law or the gun snob at the range or the know-it-all at the gun counter or whatever, they're not going to be there to help you. They're not going to have your back. So whatever you decide that you want to use as far as, you know, the type of weapon and or ammunition that you're using, make sure that you're comfortable with it, because they're not going to be there to help you with it, and chances are neither am I. It's probably going to be you and maybe a couple of your friends or your retreat community or whatever the case may happen to be. So when we're looking at options, one thing that people have mentioned to me or said to me, you know, depending on how it's stated or the question is posed, is, well, if an expanding round is such a good option, then why don't our troops use that? Or if it's good enough for our troops, then it's good enough for me. Well, again, the idea or the concept here isn't necessarily that the full metal jacket round is better than an expanding round, but according to the Declaration of St. Petersburg, it's something that people agreed to, as well as the Hague International Peace Conference. And yes, guys, I know that our troops don't only use full metal jacket rounds. I know that, I'm aware of that. But if you read the fine print of the Hague International Peace Conference, if there's even one group of combatants involved in it that haven't signed it, then no one is bound or obliged to abide. Okay, and getting back to this injury versus kill quandary, I have, as well as many people that I've talked to that do firearms training and whatnot, or sell firearms, you hear the statement, I don't want to kill anyone, I just want to injure them. I want to make them stop what they're doing. I just want to show them the weapon and have them stop. Well, unfortunately, most times that's just simply not how it works. And this as an example, our troops, the armed forces, however you want to put it, as well as law enforcement agencies, whether it's local, state, federal, whatever, when they are trained to shoot center mass, and they are trained to continue shooting until the threat is no longer a threat. A prime example of that, and why it's probably not a good idea to have this concept as an example that, oh, I'm just going to shoot someone in the leg or something like that. Recently, what happened in New York City when one assailant, or bad guy, gunman, whatever you want to call it, pulled out a gun on a public sidewalk? Well, two officers who should have been trained professionals ended up wounding 8 other people before they actually took down the gunman. And these are professionally trained people that should have plenty of practice. And the idea or the concept that you as a layperson that has probably nowhere near the training that they do or the hours of trigger time that they have, the idea or the concept that you're going to, when your adrenaline is pumping and you're in the thick of it, that you're going to have the wherewithal to shoot someone in the leg, is probably stinking thinking. That's probably not going to be the reality of it, and that's not the way that it's going to happen. Okay? So again, injury versus kill, or injure versus kill, or injury versus death. Now, also something to keep in mind is there is a definite delineation, in my opinion, and again, it is just that, it's my opinion, and this is my commentary based on my opinion. If it's a normal situation, right? Society has not changed, everything is the norm. And you are in a self-defense situation. And we talked about earlier how that basically the zombie max round, or the Z-max round, the V-max, V as in Victor, the V-max round, and the TAP personal defense round are all basically the exact same round, right? But if it's a normal society and you shoot someone with a zombie max round, how do you think that you will be characterized in the courtroom for having used a zombie max round? And yes, guys, I fully get it. I'd rather be judged by 12 than carried by 6. Gotcha. I understand that. However, the zombie max round out of those 3 rounds is the cheapest. But if it's for personal defense, and this is something used for personal defense in normal society, spend a few extra dollars, in my opinion, and get the TAP personal defense round, because that is sold and marketed as a personal defense round. You're not out there looking for zombies to kill, right? Because that, more than likely, that is the way that you would be characterized. Now, if normal society is gone, or it's NSIG, right, then of course we're going to use whatever we have access to or whatever's the cheapest. Okay? So just keep that in mind here also when we're talking about these different concepts of self-defense. And also keep in mind that, you know, the time that normal society's gone may not be that long. What if it's only 1 to 3 months or something like that? There is a definite chance that you may be held accountable for anything that you do during that time. So again, use reasonable and prudent judgment in all of your actions and any altercations that you might be involved in my opinion. Alright, so getting back to the idea or the concept of the Declaration of St Petersburg and, you know, using bullets which expand or flatten in the human body. This concept here, injure versus kill or injury versus death. This is also a very strategic part of quote-unquote civilized war. If you injure a soldier versus kill an enemy soldier, it takes an infinite number of other soldiers to take care of that person, and dynamic and immediate medical attention must be afforded to that soldier in order to save their life. And in any theater of operations or theater of war, there is a finite number of resources that any country has available to them. So the more resources that you can use up of your enemies, that is a strategic advantage. If we kill or cause death in an enemy soldier, no immediate action has to be taken for that soldier. That soldier has unfortunately died for their country. Getting back to the question or the statement that why don't our troops use, if expanding rounds are so good, why don't our troops use them? Or if full metal jacket rounds or penetrating rounds are good enough for our troops, then it's good enough for me. Well, again, the idea or the concept here is that be aware of what your options are and then make an informed and educated decision. Our troops don't necessarily only use full metal jacket rounds because that's the most effective round. Where it started was all the way back here in 1863 that it was agreed upon that this was an inhumane practice. Well, in civilized warfare, but in a self-defense role where someone is trying to kill me and or cause seriously bodily harm to myself or to my family, that is not civilized warfare. That is a case of self-defense. And my own personal thoughts or feelings is that I would have no problem articulating to a jury of my peers who are also reasonable and prudent people the reason why I used this force or this force. Whatever you're comfortable with, but just be aware of that not one round is the best round for every situation. Round, bullet, projectile, whatever you want to call it. And like we talked about earlier, you know, the penetrating rounds were designed more for, you know, armored combatants. The full metal jacket rounds, similar situation, right? And expanding rounds be more towards soft targets. And so having different rounds for different applications, for different scenarios, would probably be in your best interest. And don't get caught up in the notion that just because, you know, the military or this police department or this federal agency does use this type of round or doesn't use another type of round, doesn't mean that it's right or wrong for you. Make sure that you're making an informed decision based on the facts, because when push comes to shove, you're the only one that's going to have to live with the consequences of your actions or your inaction. Alright, if you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them below. If you have any video responses that you'd like to do on this, and sort of some healthy debate or, adding more information to this or whatever, I welcome your video responses as long as they're, well thought out and, not trolls or flames or anything like that. And thanks again, guys. I greatly appreciate it. God bless.